Welcome everyone to your new episode of the AWA Agora Show. And I'm your host, Abhay Wadhwa, here in New York City. I'm joined today by two wonderful educators for a topic: how do we stay relevant? They are going to impact what's going to happen in the upcoming generation. So please join me in welcoming Shaun Fillion. He's the director here at NYSID. Along with Shaun, we have Jennifer Scheib. She's an instructor at University of Colorado in Boulder, also associated with the Rocky Mountain Lighting Academy. All of us are deeply appreciative of your time here.
The skill sets of storytelling has become an increasingly important part of an architectural lighting designer's scope. And the world of architecture is increasingly an opportunity for lighting storytellers to find a career that they didn't know existed. And I think one of the key things we've had to figure out during the pandemic is how do we transition from a lot of hands-on, how do we support hands-on learning? Because learning about lighting is half observation and building a language with each other about how do you talk about the impact of light in the space, this ephemeral volumetric fluctuations of radiosity that are filling the room and making something interesting.
If we used to think that our fundamentals were really about the distribution of light in space, how flux moved from one surface to another, and then ultimately how we would perceive that, what our experience would be in response, so that sort of psychological basis, I think now the fundamentals become a bit more about, you use the word spectrum, and I'll take that literally to say the electromagnetic radiation spectrum, and thinking about how different sources, different solid-state lighting sources can produce different spectrum, how they now, so I guess I'll dwell on that for a second, that maybe it's not infinitely adjustable now, that we can't create any recipe that we want, but there is this opportunity where we might be able to really think about variation in spectrum and learning how to specify that. How do we talk about it? That seems like a very open area that we haven't fully moved into yet. How do we not just use the same form factors that we used before? And so how do we specify something that is so potentially more malleable, much more able to be integrated into common building materials? And so I feel like we're at that point where these opportunities exist. It feels homogenous because our way into it right now is to keep it fitting into something of the past, but the opportunity is here to have something much more differentiated from project to project than we have ever had before.
That's a beautiful positive view to think. Shaun, what do you think?
I agree. I think one of the things I'll add to that, I think again, part of my story and how I got into architectural lighting was the idea of storytelling and dimming and things that become so much more accessible with LED. Just talking about access, or the idea of equitable lighting. That LED, now that it's one of the benefits of commoditization, or that it's gotten cheaper, is that we would see color mixing in people's residences, playing with hue system and stuff. I think this is going to make the role of the designer more and more visible and more important.
Our job is to constantly reassess what are those roots, what are the fundamentals. And I had mentioned spectral power distribution, or thinking about spectrum, understanding that, not just starting with the lumen. There's radiant energy out there. There's also some of that has an effect on us. That's the lumen. And then we would move to distribution. We actually need to go a little deeper and think about spectrum first. For example, we also need to not think about just our psychological responses, but also biological responses to light, physiological responses to light. So really adding in some of these fundamentals that are, what is the base science? What is it that we have now agreed that we can accept? Or how do we question the things we're trying to understand if we should accept? And then how are as engineers, as lighting engineers, as lighting designers, how do we take that and apply it?
Jennifer talked a little bit about reaching people in different stages with things like the Rocky Mountain Lighting Academy. And I think that's a key element of how education can move forward too, is how do we address people? I think one of my goals at NISET is start getting to undergraduates and potentially high school age students and make them aware of light as a profession. And how do we grow in that direction, grow kind of deep? But then there's the idea of how do we grow broad and talk to the manufacturers that many of them may not have that much experience in lighting itself. They may have electrical engineering backgrounds or optical design, but haven't been on the application or design side. So how do we get exposure to kind of across our industry to different values? I think that's another opportunity for us to grow.
That's fantastic. And that's so inspiring from both of you. I mean, Shaun earlier and you now, and sharing your story, your journey, because there are several students who will be listening to this, wanting to figure out if, education is what they wish to do in this amazing field of lighting design. So would love to thank you again, both of you, for all the work that you do in creating a new generation of lighting designers and engineers that will impact our visual environment for decades to come.